we now present For the Record.
The president's big, beautiful bill clears the House. We sit down with two Wisconsin lawmakers on both sides of the issue. Plus, a changing of the guard in the Wisconsin Department of Military Affairs. We sit down with the new leader of the Wisconsin National Guard. Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. We'll get to those stories and more, but we start here in Madison with the state budget process. By most metrics, Wisconsin is behind the pace needed to pass the budget by the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. Now, a reminder that Wisconsin does not go into government shutdown if that deadline is passed, but what is largely holding up the budget is a debate over a tax cut. Now, Republicans want to use part of Wisconsin's funds to spend on this tax cut, but they would need to work with the governor to make that happen. Now, the stalled negotiations made progress this week as the Democratic governor and legislative leaders met twice, and that's according to WisPolitics.com. Now, we could expect progress on the budget to move forward once that debate over that tax cut is resolved. And locally, Dane County Executive Melissa Agard says the county is facing a $31 million budget shortfall for next year. Now, the county executive says that is in part due to rising operational costs and some inflation-driven expenses for building projects. Now, Agard added that uncertainty of federal dollars coming in from Washington is also partly driving that shortfall. Now, Agard is asking county agencies to consider a 4% cut when putting together their budget requests, saying in a statement that she is trying to avoid layoffs. Now, the county will hold budget listening sessions at the Alliant Energy Center on June 4th. And new numbers out this week from Marquette Law School shows that the country is skeptical of the president overstepping his authority. Now, 81% of respondents said that the president should not be able to step in and make new laws if Congress does not act. Now, that's a slight uptick from when Biden was president and an increase still from a similar poll taken during Trump's first term. And the poll also shows that 84% of Americans think that the president has a duty to obey court rulings, and 64% say that the judicial orders blocking the president's actions are a proper use of that branch's authority. We also have new numbers in the race for governor. These come from a straw poll conducted by WisPolitics.com at the Republican State Party Convention. They show that party insiders favor Washington County Executive Josh Schoemann by a slim margin at 37%. Northwoods Congressman Tom Tiffany came in second with 35%, and 2024 U.S. Senate candidate Eric Hovde rounded out the top three with 12%. Now, Schoemann, that top vote-getter in the straw poll, is the only candidate who has declared his run for governor on the Republican side. Now, he campaigned in Madison this week, speaking at a Pints and Politics event hosted by the Dane County GOP. And we caught up with him after that event.
Yeah, I mean, being here present in Dane County I think is critically important. You know, there are a lot of Republicans in Dane County, but there's a lot of good Wisconsinites. And, you know, having these conversations face to face about what the future of this state should look like, hearing it from them, and then carrying that vision together.
Now, also on the campaign trail, appellate court judge Chris Taylor has announced that she will enter the race for Wisconsin Supreme Court. That race will take place next April for a seat currently held by conservative Justice Rebecca Bradley. Now, Taylor had previously served on the Dane County Circuit Court, and before that, she was an elected Democrat in the state assembly. Now, Bradley has told reporters last month that she plans to seek another term. Also on the campaign trail, Democrat Randy Bryce announced that he will again challenge Congressman Brian Stile for southern Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District. Now, Bryce first ran against Ryan for the seat back in 2018 under the moniker Iron Stash. Now, he faced Stile during that 1st congressional run, ultimately losing that race. In response to the announcement, Stiles' campaign tells us that, quote, while radicals like Bryce continue to try and take our nation backwards, Congressman Brian Stile has a record of delivering real results. Stile this week joined his Republican colleagues in voting for the Big Beautiful Bill, a major piece of legislation that extends tax cuts while making eligibility changes to programs like Medicaid. Now, these changes include requiring childless adults without disabilities to work 80 hours per month or 20 hours per week. Now, another provision would increase the amount of state and local taxes that can be deducted from federal taxes. That's up to $40,000 for couples making up to $500,000. Now, states would also have to contribute more to SNAP benefits, also known as food stamps, and the bill would eliminate taxes on tips and overtime pay, a key campaign promise from President Trump. Now, for more on the impacts to Wisconsinites, we spoke to two members of Wisconsin's congressional delegation. We'll hear more from Dane County Democrat Mark Pocan in a minute, but we start with Janesville Republican Brian Stile. Congressman Stile, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So first, I want to start with the impact that this bill will have for Wisconsinites.
This bill, I think, is a great opportunity to get our country back on track. It makes the tax reforms permanent. It guarantees that Wisconsin families will not see a tax increase. And I think it's going to see a continuation of investment with employers in better and higher paying jobs in the state of Wisconsin. It makes an investment in securing the U.S.-Mexico border to build on the success that President Trump has had in making that secure. And it does that while saving money at a period of time where the federal government is spending way beyond its means. So this is a huge opportunity to move this country forward and get ourselves moving in the right direction once again.
So some of the pieces of the bill, we've seen a report from the state with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services showing that 52,000 Wisconsinites could be at risk of losing their eligibility for Medicaid under this bill. Are there any concerns about what might happen there?
It's a lot of fear mongering coming out of the left because what this bill does is actually secures important programs for the people that it was designed for. This doubled down on our commitment to making sure that the most vulnerable are protected: children, pregnant women, permanently disabled adults. What it does is it put in place work requirements to make sure that able-bodied childless adults are working a minimum of 20 hours a week as they receive benefits. Far too often, we allow individuals to talk about the success of some of these important programs simply by the amount of money we put into the program. We should be looking at the outcome. How many people are we allowing to lift themselves up and out of the need for federal government support and into a private sector job with private insurance? And so at the end of the day, this bill is about lifting people up while protecting the most vulnerable. The fear mongering will continue, but I would encourage everyone to look at the actual legislative text.
Perhaps addressing some of those concerns as well. We've seen broadly some themes that these are some cuts to the federal budget, but it's pushing some onus, some responsibilities back onto the state. For a Wisconsin taxpayer who, might have to pay higher Wisconsin taxes in the wake of this, what would you kind of say to assuage any of those concerns there?
I don't think you'll actually see that come to play. I think what it's saying as it relates to the SNAP benefits, a really important food program, having the state have a 5% skin in the game, making sure that the states who are involved in operating those programs are making sure that they're doing the eligibility checks is actually really important, because we've seen in particular in other states a lot of abuse of these programs. We could look, for example, at California waiving the asset test as it relates to Medicaid, which allows individuals, say in the state of California, who is a multi-million-dollar lottery winner, would be eligible for Medicaid because they're not even doing the basic checks and tests to determine that those who are on the program are those that it's eligible for. Make sure that states have some basic level of skin in the game. 5% of the total spend as it relates to SNAP benefits actually, I think, is going to strengthen the program again for those that are deserving, those that the program was actually designed for. So a lot of the fear mongering of those that are saying that this will injure people, I think, are missing the point. What we're doing is strengthening the program for those that truly need it, and making sure that we're testing the program so that those individuals that the program's not designed for, that we lift them up off the need of the program and into a good or better paying job.
Now this bill heads to the U.S. Senate. What changes could we expect in that chamber?
There could be some alterations to the bill in the Senate. I think there's opportunities for even more savings in making sure that this bill is even better. But we'll look to see how the Senate reacts to this. But I think this is a substantive and meaningful step forward in getting our country back on track. We have a massive spending problem in the United States. This one bill alone does not solve the entire problem, but it is unquestionably a step in the right direction.
Congressman Stile, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, across the aisle, we caught up with Dane County Congressman Mark Pocan. Here's more. All right, well, Congressman, thanks so much for sitting down with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will. Appreciate it.
So I first want to start again with this idea of what will be the impact of this big, beautiful bill for Wisconsinites.
Well, this is a big, beautiful bill if you're a billionaire. For everyone else, we're all going to pay for it in different ways. Some people, 14 million people, are going to lose their health insurance across the country. 11 million people will lose food assistance. A whole lot of other provisions got added in the end. It's everything was voted on at night. No one can exactly tell you where everything lands, but one big surprise, they had never put a direct cut to Medicare in the bill until this week. And because of how the pay-go rules go, it's a $500 billion cut. So we were told they wouldn't cut Medicaid. They did. They certainly never said they were going to cut Medicare. They did. And I think we're just finding out every day more and more things that are going to hurt the average family in Wisconsin, also that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and people who could afford to go to Mar-a-Lago are able to get a tax break.
So we've heard some concerns that this will largely put some pressure, some of the onus back on the states to fill some of the gaps that might be lost in this federal cuts here. What's your take on kind of what that will mean for Wisconsinites and the Wisconsin state government?
Well, and that's a problem. But some of this is going to be pushed down to the state. But, even more complicated is they changed some things. Like if you were getting food assistance and you had someone in your family who was, under 18, they automatically kind of were included. Well, now they changed that to under 8. So if your kid's 8, you got to start having the kid fill out paperwork in order to get assistance. It's really ridiculous. And they did so many little tweaks like this to steal money, again, from, working people to pay for the tax cut that I think, people are going to find that it's going to be harder to get those services. The states are going to have pressure on them. One thing that Derek Van Orden said he fixed, it certainly didn't fix anything, was about the error rate in Wisconsin. We had a really low error rate, and now we're going to get penalized even more. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things that we're still finding out, but at the end of the day, those costs are going to be pretty great going on to the state, in addition for what we're all going to pay for.
Wonderful. Well, Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
When we come back, we break down the latest on the shooting at UW-Platteville. News 3 Now's Arman Raman explains how the community is overcoming the latest incidents of gun violence in Wisconsin. And later, we sit down with the new leader of the Wisconsin National Guard, Adjutant General Matthew Strub joins us. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Another Wisconsin community was impacted by gun violence this past week, this time UW-Platteville. Now, the campus was briefly placed on lockdown, and we would later learn that 2 students died in a murder-suicide. Now, covering the story for News 3 Now this week has been our very own Arman Raman. He joins us now. Thanks for chatting with us. Appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, thank you, Will.
So when we look back this past Monday, the call comes into the newsroom, right? Can you kind of describe a little bit behind the scenes, like what happened, what unfolded there?
Of course, and I think it's worth noting this is the type of story you never hope you have to cover in a community like Madison or in the Madison area, and of course in a small community like Platteville. So we were on the air actually during Live at 4 when all we were hearing was that there was some type of active incident at UW-Platteville, and the wires were getting a little bit crossed because we heard that there was a lockdown, we heard students were told to shelter in place, but then we were told that there was no active threat. We were told that there were injuries. So just as I'm sure parents and students were struggling to get information, we were as well. And we were trying to relay that information to our viewers as much as we could with the little details that we had. Eventually, as the day went on, we would learn more, not just from the university, but also from students and others on campus who would come up to me and say, I heard gunshots. I smelled gunpowder inside that dorm, Wilgus Hall at UW-Platteville campus, which obviously nothing a college student should have to experience, of course, in their first, second, or last years.
Happening during finals, no less, too. I think kind of the big thing to keep in mind with a story like this is, you have the aftermath and how the community kind of comes together and rebuilds. I know you've been back to Platteville a couple of times this week. What do we know from that?
Well, students, even though, like you said, it is that very contained type of incident that may not have actively and immediately threatened, other students, people were still shaken up. They were going through a loss. And UW-Platteville was very quick to offer counseling services immediately the day of. And on Wednesday, I went back and I had spoken to one of the contracting companies that were helping them with those counseling services. And they said that, everyone is experiencing and coping through that loss in their own way. And so they offered different types of, on-site counseling with their 3 therapists, as well as therapists from Empathia, which was another company. And then they also offered virtual counseling services because, like you said, it was finals week. It's the end of the year. For many, the end of college life, so they may not have been on campus, extended amount of time, so they were able to access that virtual counseling through Mantra Health as well. And I saw therapy dogs on campus, and I just saw a lot of students just going to each other saying, hey, what can I help with? Do you need help cleaning out your dorm, whether it was the dorm room that had happened or a different one, just do you need a friend right now? It's a small campus community, but it was really tight-knit, and they really came together through this.
Well, Arman, thanks so much for all your reporting this week. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Will.
Now, when we come back, we sit down with the new leader of the Wisconsin National Guard, talking about the service's legacy and how Wisconsin is handling changes in DoD policy coming out of Washington. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to For the Record. A changing of the guard quite literally, as Governor Evers here last month named a new adjutant general for the Wisconsin National Guard. Now, Major General Matthew Strub will lead Guard members at a time of change in the military, spurred by new policies out of the Trump administration in D.C. And also, as back at home, the Guard is looking at a future of changing deployments, especially now that we are 5 years out from the pandemic. Now, we spoke with General Strub here at his office in Truax Field. Thanks for sitting down with us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's truly an honor to be talking with you.
Oh, well, likewise. I want to ask kind of broadly for those who might be a little bit unacquainted with the National Guard, kind of what's your mission? What would you want people to know?
Yeah, so the National Guard is a huge organization here in the state. We have about 10,000 members. And we are the primary reserve for the nation's defense. So we're the combat reserve for the nation's defense. If the nation needs us, that's what the National Guard is for. That's the primary mission. Secondary, because of our primary mission, we have a lot of capabilities, both personnel and resources. And so that we're a resource for the state. We can step in when other local entities don't have the resources and aid. So we're really here for both the nation and the citizens of Wisconsin.
The thing that strikes out most to me is when you talk about that readiness, the National Guard's ability to step in, especially during the COVID pandemic. How have things evolved in the last 5 years here?
Yeah, you speak about the COVID pandemic. I think it's a great showcase of how versatile the National Guard is. We never trained for a pandemic or stepping in to help with vaccines, but because of our day-to-day training and our ability to be ready for any kind of scenario, whether it's responding to a tornado or going overseas and being in a combat environment, it's preparing people, our soldiers, our airmen, to be ready to respond to whatever is needed. When the pandemic happened, we got involved in all kinds of things like distributing vaccines, distributing PPE, the personal protective equipment, manning polling stations when polling people weren't available because they're usually elderly folks that were not in a position to go out in public. So we stepped in and helped out in many different arenas during that time. And we did it because we have the resources. It isn't our primary mission, but we're so versatile that we were able to do that. But now stepping back from that, taking that opportunity, what we learned from that helps us prepare for other things coming forward. So now we have that in our back pocket. We're keeping the after-action reviews that we do and find out what it was that went well, what didn't go so well, and train for anything that comes in the future.
So I understand too, there's the Wisconsin component, but it's also the Army Reserve component as well. We've seen certainly some changes in D.C., and I want to protect your apolitical nature, certainly. But for some of the impacts of changes to diversity, equity, and inclusion that we've seen in Washington, how does that impact the National Guard here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so that when the policies, procedures, or regulations for the Army or the Air Force change, we have to look at those policies and look at how they affect us here. If it's a personnel policy, we have to follow the regulations from the service, whether it's Air Force and Army, and they're slightly different. They have different regulations, but we have to follow those policies. And then we work with our personnel to make sure that we treat people with dignity and respect throughout, right? As the policies change, we want to take care of our people, and that's really our focus.
So National Guard in Wisconsin too has had a little bit of a legacy of an issue with sexual assault and reporting. Yeah. How's that changed? What's the future going to look like?
Yeah, over the last several years, we've really put a lot of emphasis on making sure that we're following the process and procedures that are laid out in regulations within the services, within National Guard Bureau. And the focus is on taking care of the victims and helping prevent any sexual assault, sexual harassment. Our processes are now, we just had an evaluation done about 2 months ago, one of the best in the nation. And I'm really proud of that change, right? We really put the emphasis in taking care of anyone who ends up in that situation, because there are people, there are assets, they're part of our team and our family, and then working towards preventing any situation like that.
I want to ask too, I mean, not necessarily you're on the job relatively recently here, but what do you hope will be your legacy?
Wow, I want to make sure that I leave this organization better than I found it. I found it in an extremely good place. But my focus is on the people. So on our airmen, our soldiers, and our civilian employees, making sure they get as much training, resources to do their jobs as possible. Take care of them so that they have opportunities to grow from here. You know, some will have a full career and spend 20 plus years in uniform or in the organization. Some will come here for a period of time and take what they learned here and then help benefit the rest of the culture, the rest of the community.
Our interview there with the leader of the Wisconsin National Guard, Matthew Strub. When we come back, nurses at One Madison Hospital are set to strike next week. We'll hear from them right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Looking ahead this week, nurses at Meriter Hospital in Madison are poised to start striking on Tuesday. Now, this comes after negotiations between the nurses union and the hospital broke down this past week. Now, the nurses say that they are looking for better protections for safety for nurses and patients, including a lower patient-nurse ratio.
We didn't make this decision lightly. We became nurses for our patients, and so although this is a kind of scary time where we don't know what's happening, we also don't want to do this because it's scary and we don't know what's happening for our patients. And so I don't want it to seem like this is just a frivolous decision.
Now, that strike starting Tuesday is set to continue through Sunday. And a reminder that you can watch full episodes of the show as well as expanded interviews on our website at channel3000.com. That does it for us this week. I'm Will Keneally. Have a great rest of your weekend.
This has been For the Record.